most organizations have been in this position sort of, a decade ago where it was all about let's get as much data as we can.
Yeah.
And we've sort of hit the point now where they've got too much data. Let's use it to make valuable decisions. Transformation, there's 3 steps you go through. There's digitization, digitalization, and transformation. So actually that rings a bell, because actually, if you think about it from an automation perspective, digitization is copying the human steps.
Yeah.
Digitalization is actually improving the process as you do it. And transformation is doing it in a different way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, The Edge of Transformation, where we sit down with leaders in the digital transformation, intelligent automation, and AI space and have discussions about the journeys, lessons learned, and plans for the movers and shakers that are shaping the industry's future. Today, I'm joined by Deepak Karwal, AI and intelligent automation advisor, author of the book, The Automated Enterprise, and vice president at XpertRule Software. I hope you enjoy. It's a good one. Perfect. Well, thanks again for joining me. I think it would be good to sort of start off just as a quick intro question for you, to let everyone know a bit about yourself. So leaving that quite open. If you want to give people an idea about who you are, what you're doing, that sort of thing.
Sure. Name's Deepak Karwal. I'm based in looks like a sunny Nottingham, which is a rarity. So in the UK. So anyone that knows cricket, we live down the road from Trent Bridge, so you can normally hear the crowd, which is always a nice place to be.
Nice.
So in terms of professionalism, I guess I've been in the enterprise software space, for a few decades now. Started off there many moons ago. Really been helping, I guess, organizations scale up. So initially started with a small boutique consultancy called Princeton Consulting, which focused on, at that time, was the CRM space.
Okay.
Help upgrade that organization into a reasonable size business, and then moved over to work for a telco, and that was first exposure to a product type business, so building contact center technology effectively. So those were the days where voice over IP was quite a rarity in a contact center environment.
Right.
So effectively, it was building, front office voice over IP integrated with CRM product for a large telco, and that was a sort of spin out venture of the telco, which is quite interesting. So startup business, but within an enterprise organization. So funded by the big daddy, if you like, in terms of the organization, but run as very much a startup business. So that was really interesting, scaling that from 2 people to a good 40, 50 people in terms of that organization. Yeah. And then since then, been helping other organizations grow, and been involved also in program delivery as well. So quite a varied technology footprint, I think, but ultimately it's always been about technology and business, right? Ultimately.
Yeah.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Because I think I've always sat in the middle of understanding the technology, but obviously the importance of understanding where the business fits into it. So acting as almost that sort of that go-between, which is obviously critical, right, in terms of the value of technology. So yes, that's really how I started a long time ago. And I probably spent the last, as you know, right, I've spent the last decade focused specifically on the automation space, right, in terms of automation, building, automation technologies and helping organizations across that space specifically.
Okay, good. And just jumping back a little bit to when you first started at that consultancy with this on the CRM front, how did you get into that? Was that did you go from that from uni, or how did you kind of come across that? I just want to kind of understand how you got into sort of technology as a whole, really, just about that, because I know people are always interested in that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. I think in that time, once again, I think the IT sector was really in its a big growth phase in the noughties. So I think at that time I went straight from initially doing actually a science degree initially. So physics, totally different. I realized I didn't want to have a white coat and get bold really quickly, cliches aside. So I ended up doing a master's in technology, IT, effectively. So that enabled me to effectively work very quickly and move into effectively an enterprise solution consulting business.
So at the time you really thought that, I guess did you sort of identify that technology was going to be a much bigger play? Was that something you were much more sort of passionate about after doing,
Yeah,
the chemistry piece?
it was definitely passion. Once again, where you could see technology and actually how it could drive value for a business. I think that's what it was
Yeah.
about, right? And as I said, I think that time the whole CRM enterprise space was really interesting. It's almost analogous to where automation is now, but that was the panacea in terms of every organization wanting to get close to their customers, to build that 360-degree customer view internally in their organizations. So yeah, technology was an enabler in that respect, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I know you sort of touched on it towards the end, your journey with digital transformation, automation, to a certain extent, AI. What's your journey been with that? How did you first sort of get introduced to that? And, how have you sort of taken steps since then? What's that journey look like from there on?
Yeah, so I initially started within a telco organisation. So what they were looking to do was effectively build some level of automation into their front office at that particular
Okay.
point in time. So I came in as an advisor and helping to build that capability effectively. So it was really interesting because it was my first exposure to tools like RPA, and we're talking probably about 8-9 years ago here, right?
Yeah.
But actually, it was really interesting because what we did is we were able to build a team actually in the front office. So in the
Okay.
middle of where you had all the contact center agents, there were these four people, part of my team at that point in time, that were listening into conversations, understanding how the business operated at front office, and then identifying what we could automate to add value to the agents. So it was really embryonic,
Oh,
really
wow.
organic. There weren't any specific best practices at that point in time, right? So we were trying to wing it. We had an agile methodology ultimately, but we had a couple of BAs, we had a couple of developers. So it was really trying to find our feet in terms of actually how does the automation technology work and how can we deliver stuff quickly out to the front office
Yeah.
and demonstrate that to the business. So it was a really interesting time, especially at that point in time in terms of the RPA emergence and actually just in terms of the situ of the business, right?
And did you find that because those people were there, with the sort of contact center, their front office, did you find that having them there, within the business where they were situated, did you find that helped? Did they sort of get their head around what they were really doing? Because I know I speak to some people, the teams are so remote, and they never really they do talk obviously, but
Yeah.
because they're not there in and amongst it, it's kind of hard for them to get their head around what's exactly happening.
I think it's important to have that level of experience. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't assume that every project can have those sorts of circumstances, but I
Yeah.
think having experience that is important, whether it's in one project or a couple of projects, because you do feel the dynamic. You feel the pain, the pressure that a front office agent, for example, might have when they're speaking to a customer. The other benefit that we had is actually if we weren't sure about a particular process and how we could automate it, we had access to super users. We
Yeah.
basically, they'd put their call down, they'd come to us and we'd say, well, do you think this looks right? Would this help? And we'd get feedback immediately. So typically in a larger organization where you don't have that dynamic, you do slow down that flow of information from the business to your developers, your automation configurators. But
Yeah.
actually here we were able to benefit from that fluidity ultimately. And that
Yeah.
ultimately means you've got a shorter time to deliver ultimately, but then also you've got the business who basically know what they're going to get ideally. So you haven't got the disconnect. So I
Yeah.
think that's obviously a real benefit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess there's not a lot of unknowns then because they're working so closely together. I know it's not always possible for a lot of business, especially nowadays when remote working is such a big thing. I guess it's hard to sort of get that across. Do you what's your sort of preference, I guess, from that experience? Do you have a preference of like a hybrid working model in that sense, or would you rather everyone be together, or would you rather everyone work remotely? I don't know what you've seen work well.
Yeah, I guess it's always right. There's different lenses. I think from a working practice perspective, I think hybrid is great, right? Just because as always, it's the water cooler conversation piece, right? Where you can
Yeah,
speak to
yeah,
someone that's not necessarily related to your project or related to your department, but you can talk about stuff. And I think especially when you've got an automation hat on in any organization, you're looking at problems that different parts of the organization might have, right? So
yeah,
you might be working for the front office, but guess what? You bump into someone that's working on some back office processes, or you speak to a different department of head that's got another problem. You're always on the scan for different problems across the organization. And typically in the remote environment, as we all know, you just have your calls and you're focused
yeah,
on that. As I said, there's obviously a very beneficial side in terms of the working from home, right? I mean,
yeah,
just purely be able to not do the commute and all that sort of great stuff. Yeah. But I think we do definitely miss out. And I think there is a level of rebalancing that's happening, right? I think in workplaces.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think we're starting to find a balance now where the remote part is great, but I think people realize, and even people that I'm speaking to about new career moves, they're saying, I do like to spend a bit of time in the office. Whereas, a year ago, everyone was like, no, I just want everything completely remote. I just want to stay at home and have that sort of balance. But I think they've realized that, in terms of either it's productivity or the actual outcomes that they're delivering, they're not as what they should be, really. So I think people are starting to come around to that idea, and I think organizations can appreciate that as well. So that's a sort of big shift that we've seen, and I think it's good. I think it's good for everyone. I think it's good for the businesses because they get a good balance of what's needed, but then also the staff and the employees, they get that balance of the home working, and they get the interaction, FaceTime, like you say, the water cooler type stuff. So I think that's all quite a good sort of combination for success.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from there at that telco, what was the sort of next step in that kind of automation AI kind of journey for you? What did that look like from there?
So once again, I was quite fortunate. I was able to sort of cascade a number of different roles over sort of 3 or 4 years. You're working for a large automotive company, then working for a retail pharmaceutical company, and actually all within the same sort of perspective of actually going in to build automation capabilities, because actually at some point it becomes what you need to build in terms of the core capability is the same. I guess it's very different, is obviously the types of use cases that you get in, right? I mean, obviously there's some level of repeatability in terms of the back office stuff, right? There's common finance processes, maybe common marketing processes. But I guess where it gets quite interesting is some of that middle office and front office stuff. When you're working for an automotive, for example, we did some really interesting stuff on supply chain, where we're able to identify the risk across the supply chain, where an organization might have something like 30,000 suppliers for that particular manufacturer. And then you've got something totally different, which is you're talking to the head of pharmacy for a large, retail pharmacist. And you're talking about actually how can automation help reduce risk in front office, giving prescriptions to customers. So they're all totally different, but actually, helping these business leaders that are very focused on their type of business, explain them how automation works. I think we've moved a lot in the last 10 years in terms of that education piece, but then trying to correlate it to how it can add value to their part of the organization, and then demonstrating that in some way. I mean, that's always what keeps it exciting, right? The fact you've got these different businesses and you're talking about different business case studies.
Yeah. I guess there's, like you say, you can see some similarities between certain things, but I guess every business is so different in its own unique way. I guess you have to have a sort of problem solving type head about you to be able to go in and really identify what actually is going to work and what's not going to work, and what route you should take. It seems, from the people that I've spoken to at least, seems like there's no one right way to do it. There are certain things that you can do, but it's all very, when it comes down to it, it's all very different, at least from the people that I speak to.
Yeah. As I said, the similarities, but I think what's always kept it really exciting, right, is the fact that you can solve different problems across a wide enterprise estate, and quickly, and that's always been the benefit of automation to a certain degree, relatively quickly compared to where we were 20 years ago, is deliver or demonstrate value, right, ultimately.
Oh, good. Okay. And so in terms of your focus right now, what are you sort of focused on currently? What are you doing? Let everyone know sort of what you're up to.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things really. I mean, still advising organizations, in terms of how to, either build or scale, or sometimes, fix or turn around their automation capabilities is still, it's still something I've sort of got involved in. It's quite interesting, right? Because I think once again, having done it for a decade or so, I guess you're at this point now where a lot of organizations, even if they have invested in some level of automation capability, some of them get to this point where they start, sort of stalling a little bit, right? Because they've done the low hanging fruit effectively, they've done the easy stuff. So you start scratching your heads in terms of what stuff is next. So I think going into organizations a lot and helping them actually turn the corner around that has been important. So that's really been an advisory piece ultimately. I think what's been related to that for me is having experienced that in a lot of organizations where you've taken off the easy stuff. What you left with the complex stuff in the business. So I joined an organization called XpertRule a few years ago as well. So that's in a scale up part phase of their business. And they sit in quite an interesting space called decision intelligence. And that's really about looking at, I guess, one perspective, it's about taking the more complex stuff that people do and looking at actually how can you use the most important assets in the organization? How can you use the data and the people to potentially drive greater throughput? So that might be through automation, but it might be also through augmentation, right?
Okay.
So that's, I think decision intelligence has been quite an interesting one. I think Gartner are interestingly, really pushing their thought leadership around that. But it's really the fact that actually, being obsessed with automation is probably not the right point. It's the fact that we want to be obsessed with doing work better. Okay. And in some cases that might lead itself to automation, but in some cases, I don't know, it might be organizations working with vulnerable customers, or they need to give advice to customers, in which case it's about enabling the people that are still speaking to the organization. So I think decision intelligence brings an interesting just perspective of taking a different approach, if you like. So XpertRule has been a leader in sort of decision intelligence space for a while. So yeah, helping scale that business from a sort of from that perspective as well, which has been interesting.
Oh, exciting. And I guess for that, with the just on the decision intelligence piece, for organizations that are sort of looking into that, do they need to be, a certain like X amount of length in their journey with like automation, or can they just come in and start looking at decision intelligence before they've even started looking at automation or anything like that? Is that something they could probably do?
Yes, I think really good question. You don't need to have started on any automation journey. I mean, some interesting. I was speaking to a partner a couple of weeks ago, and they work in the US, specifically in the mortgage offshoring outsourcing business.
Okay.
So they were sharing an interesting statistic in terms of about 8 years ago, an underwriter would underwrite about 7 or 8 applications in the US. That's changed now to about 4 or 5 applications per day. Now that doesn't mean that underwriters have got lazy or etc. What's actually happened is the amount of data that's been available now to that whole sector has actually exploded. It's been explosive growth. So underwriters now have credit history data. They now have third-party risk data, climate change data. So actually being able to assimilate all those data points to then make a risk decision upon that application just takes longer. Okay. So you can imagine in an organization like that, it doesn't mean they should have had to invest in automation in some way. You're simply looking at a problem there. But one way that decision intelligence really helps is actually using value from their data. Most organizations have been in this position sort of, a decade ago where it was all about let's get as much data as we can. And we've sort of hit the point now where they've got too much data. Let's use it to make valuable decisions, which is quite an interesting sort of shift now, right? Decision intelligence, it's almost approaching automation in a different way. Rather than looking at the beginning of a business process and how do we automate the process end to end, you look at the end of it and say, okay, what's the right decision that we need to make? Okay, and then how do we enable the organization to make that? Do we have the right data? Do we have the right people? Have we captured the right knowledge? So it's almost a different way to look at it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like what you say about the data and evidence. Like we need more data, and we've heard it all before. Data is gold, and if you can get as much data as possible, then that's great. But then, like you say, I guess you've got all these organizations that have got so much data now, they don't know what to do with it. They're like, great, we've got all this data, but how do we act on it? Like your customers, certain processes or other things that are going on in the business. How do you actually make use of that data? That's the I guess the next step for a lot of businesses, isn't it?
Yeah. And from an AI perspective, it really sort of hits that point of inflection where you've got your AI capability in the organization. You've got your data scientists who are looking at data models, but at some point you then need to correlate those into business and the business process, and then bring them together in terms of, okay, what's the decision that we now need to make that uses those data models, uses the data. So it's interesting because even from a capability perspective, once again, you've got that bridge between the technologists, and the data scientists and the data teams, and then you've got the business process experts. So in some ways it hasn't changed because you've still got those different sort of types or groups of people with different narratives, different objectives, and trying to bring them together ultimately to make the right decision. And that's really what every organization wants to get to, right? You want to make a decision, whether that be is that the right loan that we need to underwrite for that particular customer? The customer's called in to make a complaint. What's the right decision we need to make for them? Everything is based upon a decision. So I think that's really where AI, as you talked about earlier, data and the business process and business knowledge really sort of intersect. I think that's really, it's been quite an interesting, product in terms of looking how we can do that.
Yeah, I guess that's quite a topical conversation that I have with a lot of people. Everyone's talking about what they can do with, a certain technology. Can I do this with automation? Can I do this with AI? But really, I guess it's about the outcome at the end. And, it doesn't really matter what technologies you use along the way. It's about what's right for the business and what works, rather than just buying something and investing in it thinking it's going to be a silver bullet to solve problems. Probably a mistake that some people have made over the past few years with with certain technologies and tools.
I think it's been an interesting journey, isn't it? I think, once again, I think learnings and reflecting over the last decade in terms of the automation piece, I think, it was a lot easier going into an organization and observing somebody doing something or observing someone doing work, and then looking at, okay, what technology sets do you need to bring in? Initially, it was RPA, and then it was, okay, RPA, maybe we need some OCR because someone's looking at a document. But actually, I think at some point, you've got to go above that, because it's not about technology to replicate what humans do, because that's very limiting, right? Because technology works in a fundamentally different way. And we'd get to that point, and still from an advisory perspective, I'll go to C of E's, and actually they're still looking at the way people do stuff. And a very way to break that and look at it from an innovation perspective is you speak to a head of department or a business leader and say, okay, how many people have you got doing that activity? Okay, 3 people. Okay, let's assume you've got 300 people now in that department as opposed to 3 people. How would you do things differently? And then they start really thinking, because then technology can look at a process, and you think that human capacity is unlimited. How would you then do it differently? And that's really where you start driving innovation. And I think we are trapped in this mindset of digitizing work, but not transforming it. To transform it, you've got to think about it from a different way, not just think about it from the human's perspective of how would a human do it. And I think that's where we need to sort of change the mindsets, and that's where we need to help organizations use automation to drive innovation, as opposed to just digitizing work as it is, right?
That's really interesting, actually, thinking of it as, like you say, transformation rather than digitizing. I think the two very different things. Okay, good. I guess onto probably the 2 questions that I know that sort of a lot of our viewers really like to hear from people who come on to the podcast, and it's about your biggest, or your biggest failure to date and biggest success to date as well. So I guess starting off, in terms of, we'll start off with failures first. In terms of your biggest failure, what would you say that's been throughout your career, and how did you, what did you learn from it, or how did you learn from it? It's always quite tricky thinking of a failure, but I know I've had many, but it's hard to cherry pick.
Once again, I think it's all about perspective, isn't it? In terms of, think it was failure, or do you think it was learning? I think one point always resonates with me is I mentioned the venture business within a telco in terms of the contact center space. And I think an important point is always keeping close to your client in terms of what they're doing and the challenges they had. And unfortunately, we were in a position where we had one customer, who was looking to cancel the contract. And I think just the fact that customer had decided to leave was disappointing, because I don't think we felt enough, we kept close enough to the customer. And I think the point that always resonates with me is when I had to go up to actually see the director of that business. I was told that I thought buying a contact center from you was like buying knickers from Marks and Spencer's. It would just work. so to keep a straight face in a very difficult organization was I think that was very humbling. And there was a lot to be learned from that. Especially about the brand that you support and the expectations that the customers have on you to deliver. So I think that was a great learning, right?
I guess it's always hard as well, because I'm assuming that at some point someone sold them that contact center solution and you were kind of there to help deliver it. Did it sit more with the salesperson, perhaps, maybe over egging the capability, or
maybe, but it's I think getting into that accountability is challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think you've got to treat, and I think especially when you're in a scale up business, where you've got that mentality of actually it is quite a small family unit at that point in time. So at some point you might be the salesperson, you might be the delivery person, etc. So yeah, I don't think there's that scale where you could say it was sales, but I think I'm sure there was some element of that.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's humbling and learning, but you need those experiences just to realize who the end game is. I think now in today's world, it becomes more and more critical, right? Where most organizations now are looking at, you're looking at ARR from an organization growth perspective, right?
Yeah.
So you have this level of customer churn continually in the background that you're trying to manage. So trying to figure out how you manage that with a customer success hat on, and continually not just having a customer just every month by month keeping on board and maintaining their 3-month, 5-month contract, but actually growing the business and growing the value that you have. I think that's where, once again, there's been shifts in terms of actually new approaches around customer success, which really looks at how can you grow the customer value. So I think that's probably an important deliverable or driver from that lesson, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think just on the sort of customer success point, I think I've seen it over the last 10 years in recruitment. I've worked on a handful of customer success positions, and the role has evolved so much. It's very much gone from, you kind of a bit of a, not really kind of account management. It was almost seen as account management to start with. And now it's sort of evolved to, you need to get in and amongst, the weeds and find out, what's working, what's not working, where else, can you identify other areas of the business and make sure they're getting the most out of what they've already purchased, rather than just, oh, you're still here, you're happy, okay, that's fine, but have you tried this, are you doing this, so that sort of thing I think has changed massively.
Because you think back from an enterprise perspective, it's very easy now. An organization can just switch you off, right? Especially if they're using one of the hyperscalers to buy their cloud service, and it sits on top of a cloud service. It's as easy for them to move to another supplier or do something else. So entrenching might be the wrong word, but getting them to derive as much value from other parts of the enterprise organization is absolutely critical. But that's a win-win, right? Because once again, it means that you can demonstrate benefit as a vendor to them, and at the same time, they're able to no doubt use more and more benefits of greater licenses, probably at a reduced cost, as they start leveraging more across the organization. But you're right. I think the whole role of customer success is interesting one to see from an evolution perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it happens to everyone when you purchase a piece of tech, especially in the sort of in the business world. I mean, we've done it before where you purchase something and you only use sort of 50% of its functionality. You're not even using the other 50% of what's possible. I mean, I've done it before with tech that we've recruitment technology that we've purchased, and we have customer success people speak to us and saying, have you tried this, are you doing this? So, and that actually really helps us, and you start to think, oh, actually no, this is a lot better than I thought, and you start to see different gains or different returns on that sort of stuff as well. So it's within your best interest as much as it is the customer's best interest as well, to make sure that they're fully maximizing everything they've got.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. So from failures on to successes, what's been your biggest success to date, and how did you go about achieving that?
Well, I think it's a hard one to just talk about one. I think ultimately, if I was to think about where I've been really fortunate, I think once again it's about building teams that have been able to develop some level of self-sufficiency in terms of the automation capability, right? I think one thing that's always underestimated, I think, when you're building an automation capability in an organization is fine. You can find the tech stack, you can start growing the tech stack, but it's a capability which always is that fundamental human part of it. How do you have people that might come from different skill sets, different backgrounds? You might have business analysts, process experts, and then technologists, data scientists, etc., all within the same team that need to perform a function. So actually, I think the biggest successes I've had is actually where we've been able to build capabilities where they've been self-sufficient, and you've been able to constantly push them to drive greater value. And as I said, it's that mindset where the first few years you might be looking at common process that you could automate, but actually after year 2, year 3, you're starting to look at more complex things or more bigger challenges of the business, and you're almost seen as part of the business, not as a center of automation excellence, but actually a problem fixer, and a recognized fixer of core strategic problems that the organization might have. So I've been fortunate that, and that's not me, that's just the teams I've been able to help form. It's the fact that they've been able to form and actually deliver that value. And ultimately, over the last few years, it's just that number thing is important, right? It's the fact that we're able to deliver and generate multi-million pounds of benefits for organisations. I think for me, that's probably one big tick in the box, and hopefully we'll continue to work on that. I think the other personal one would be writing a book. So as I said, I think about 2 years ago, having done the whole automation bit, I was fortunate to spend a bit of head down time, and did a lot of reading over a 3-6 month period. And actually, it was quite relieving to just write down what I'd learnt and actually try to put it in some sort of framework. So actually, other organisations and other people in the automation space could benefit from it. And I still get obviously reach outs and questions and things from organisations that are still trying to implement some of it. So that was very satisfying personally and professionally, I think, just to having written something.
Yeah, and that's no small feat, to write a book. I mean, I can't even imagine the sort of work, let alone having to put pen to paper and get all of the sort of ideas and your experiences and all of your knowledge into a book on that on that sort of topic. I guess that wasn't I know you had what did you say, 6 months, was it
it was 6 months. It was but it was interesting because it as I said, it was a lot of reflection about how we done stuff, how would we do something differently, but then it was also not underestimating the amount of academic research that's out there that you could read and actually learn. Once again, we live in a world of open access to information, right? So actually, I think back to the underwriting example, it's more about how you consume the information that's available out there wisely, so then you can come to some level of conclusions or summarizations. But so it's hopefully it's out there to help organizations on their journey, right?
Yeah. And did you find, just on that as well, because it's really interesting, did you find yourself learning as well as you were writing that book? Because I know that the book's purpose was is to help people and organizations, but did you also find yourself learning as well and going through that process?
Absolutely. And there's some fantastic articles out there. And once again, there's a lot of stuff in for example in the academic arena, which are academic recognized publications, but you can actually see how you can apply it to your experience of the real world. I mean, a great example is where you talk about the journey to transformation. I think there's a fantastic article, and we'll try and share it to any of the listeners, but it was about the steps to transformation. And it was the fact that to move to transformation, there's 3 steps you go through. There's digitization, digitalization, and transformation. So actually that rings a bell, because actually, if you think about it from an automation perspective, digitization is copying the human steps. Digitalization is actually improving the process as you do it, and transformation is doing it in a different way. So there's a lot of ideas and academic constructs out there that are actually so powerful, but they haven't been applied to your context, to your world. So actually, but the problem is you've got to do the hard work in terms of the reading to then say, actually, that rings a bell, and then we can apply that to something. So it's just pulling out things like that, which were quite satisfying to be able to do that, right?
Yeah. Oh, I've been there. I've actually done that. And, and then you sort of realize once you've read the academic side of it, you can actually kind of see how the two correlate, and you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense now. And I can actually apply it in that way.
Yeah. And that goes a lot of credibility, I guess, to those academic researchers that are able to have that level of thought and understanding, just not being able to have those specific use cases, I think.
Yeah. Oh no, really, really exciting, really interesting. And we'll put a link if you've got those steps for transformation. We'll put the link in below. We'll put a link in for your book as well if people want to see that. We'll put a link in for your contact details where people can find you if they want to reach out and have any questions, whether it's about you or about XpertRule or maybe some help that you can offer them. So we'll get all of that down below, and we'll put it in the description box so everyone can find out where to reach you. But it's been great speaking to you. Thank you once again. That's done on the questions. But it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us, and we'll definitely speak soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harrison. Thanks, team.
Cheers, Deepak.
Cheers. Take care.